group of 5 friends, Kayla, Drew, Megan, Louise, and Amy, were seasoned urban explorers. They thrived on venturing into forgotten places, asylums, factories, and schools. Stumbling upon the abandoned Elmwood Grand Theatre on the outskirts of town felt like hitting the jackpot. The Grand Marquee hung precariously above the entrance, its neon letters long shattered. Kayla, the group's de facto leader, couldn't resist documenting every step. "This place is incredible," she whispered, panning her camera to capture the peeling wallpaper and crumbling chandeliers. "Why'd they close this place down?" Luis asked, his voice echoing unnaturally. "Fire, I think," Megan replied. "Part of it burned down in the 80s, but they never reopened." Amy lingered at the back, uneasy. "We should hurry," she muttered. "Places like this aren't right." The group moved deeper into the theatre, their flashlights casting long, flickering shadows. In the bowels of the building, they discovered a door unlike any other, polished and unburned, as though it hadn't aged a day. Above it, faded letters spelled out Studio 6. Drew frowned. "A rehearsal room." Kayla pushed the door open, revealing an unsettling sight. The room was small, its walls covered entirely in mirrors. Even the ceiling reflected their uneasy faces, creating an endless labyrinth of distorted versions of themselves. "This is weird," Amy whispered, avoiding her reflection. "It's incredible," Kayla exclaimed, stepping inside. Her voice echoed unnaturally, louder and sharper than it should have been. "Testing, testing," Louis joked, clapping his hands. The sound bounced back at them, amplified tenfold, as though the room itself was alive and listening. As the group explored, they noticed the room felt colder than the rest of the theatre. Their reflections seemed slightly delayed, as though they were watching copies of themselves struggling to keep up. "Guys, something's wrong," Amy said, her voice trembling. "Look." She pointed to the far wall. In the mirror, a shadowy figure stood among their reflections, an extra person who wasn't in the room. "Who the hell is that?" Megan whispered, backing away. The shadow began to move, weaving between their mirrored forms, but never appearing in the room itself. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, its limbs twisting as though its bones were breaking. "Let's go," Amy urged. But when they turned toward the door, it slammed shut with a deafening boom. Louis shouted, pounding on the door. His voice echoed, but this time, the echo didn't stop. "Louis, Louis, Louis." The repetition grew louder and more distorted, until it sounded like 100 voices screaming his name. Louis clapped his hands over his ears, but the sound seemed to come from inside his head. Suddenly, the mirrors began to ripple like water. Kayla screamed as her reflection grinned at her, something her real face wasn't doing. "Don't trust them," the reflection whispered, its voice overlapping with Kayla's own. Amy backed into a corner, tears streaming down her face. "This place isn't right. It's watching us. It wants us here." In the chaos, Drew vanished. One moment he was there, and the next, his reflection was gone. "Drew!" Kayla shouted, spinning in circles. His flashlight lay abandoned on the floor, flickering weakly. "Help me!" Drew's voice echoed, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The mirrors shifted again, showing Drew trapped behind the glass. He banged on the surface, his face contorted in terror. "Get me out of here!" Kayla ran to the mirror, but the reflection of Drew grabbed her wrist. His hand was icy, his grip unnatural. "Stay with me," he begged, his voice a horrible mixture of his own and something inhuman. The shadowy figure returned, looming behind Megan's reflection. This time, it spoke. Leave one behind, it hissed, its voice deep and guttural. One stays, and the rest may leave. No way, Kayla shouted, her voice shaking. We're not leaving anyone. The shadow laughed, the sound reverberating until the walls seemed to shake. You misunderstand. I already chose. The group turned to Amy, whose reflection stared back at her with empty eyes. She screamed as her body was yanked toward the nearest mirror. The glass rippled and swallowed her whole, leaving only her flashlight behind. Shaken, the remaining friends fled the theater, never looking back. But something was wrong. Months later, Kayla reviewed the footage she'd taken. In every video, Amy's reflection was still there watching. Back at the theater, the door to Studio 6 waits, polished and untouched. Sometimes, faint whispers echo from within. They always say the same thing. Don't trust the mirrors. Greg never liked his uncle Martin. The old man was eccentric and reclusive, spending his days in his dusty workshop repairing clocks. When Martin passed away, Greg was surprised to find he'd been left a single item in the will, a towering, ornate grandfather clock. I don't need this, Greg muttered as he stared at the clock in his living room. The wood was intricately carved, depicting strange symbols Greg didn't recognize, and the hands were frozen at midnight. His girlfriend, Sarah, admired it despite Greg's unease. It's beautiful. Maybe it just needs some love to get it working again. Reluctantly, Greg decided to fix it. Greg spent hours in his garage, oiling gears and tightening springs. As soon as he replaced the final part, the clock began to tick. Its chimes rang out with a deep, resonant tone that seemed to linger in the air. At first, Greg felt proud of his work, but strange things began happening that night. The clock chimed 12 at 3:17 a.m., waking Greg and Sarah from a dead sleep. Did you set it wrong? Sarah asked groggily. Number 8 shouldn't be chiming at all. Greg checked the clock the next morning. A single name was scratched faintly into the wood just beneath the face. Michael Anders. It wasn't a name Greg recognized, but later that day, the local news reported a freak accident. A man named Michael Anders had been struck by lightning while walking his dog at exactly 3:17 a.m. Greg couldn't shake the feeling of dread as the clock continued its strange behavior. The next night, it chimed 12 again, this time at 4:45 a.m. When he checked the clock, another name had appeared, Ellen Harper. I swear this wasn't here before, he told Sarah, showing her the faint carving. Maybe your uncle did it. Could be some kind of prank or something. But Greg's blood ran cold when he checked the news the next morning. Ellen Harper, a local librarian, had died of a heart attack at 4:45 a.m. The clock wasn't broken. It was counting down to death. Desperate, Greg tried everything to stop the clock. He unplugged it, dismantled its gears, and even locked it in the basement. But the clock kept ticking, its chimes reverberating through the house no matter where it was. One night, Greg stayed awake, determined to watch the clock. At 2:23 a.m., it chimed 12. This time, the name carved into the wood was one he recognized. Sarah Collins. No, Greg whispered, his stomach twisting in terror. Greg became frantic, refusing to let Sarah out of his sight. We have to leave, Sin, he said, throwing clothes into a bag. I'll take you somewhere safe. But as the minutes ticked closer to 2:23 a.m., Sarah began acting strangely. It's just a clock, Greg, she said, her voice unnaturally calm. You're scaring me. When the clock struck midnight, Sarah collapsed, gasping for air. No, don't take her, Greg screamed at the clock, as if it could hear him. The chimes grew louder, deafening, until the room was spinning. The clock's hand stopped at midnight, and everything went silent. A voice echoed in Greg's mind. A life for a life. Choose. Greg didn't hesitate. Take me instead, he screamed. The clock's hands began to spin wildly, and the chimes resumed, faster and louder. Sarah's breathing steadied as Greg felt his own chest tighten. His vision blurred, and he fell to the floor, gasping. But then, the voice spoke again. Not yet. Greg woke hours later to find Sarah safe, her memory of the night erased. The clock was gone from the house, replaced with a note carved into the wall. You're mine now. Fix the clock. Spread the curse. Weeks later, Greg found himself compelled to visit an antique shop. In the corner sat a clock identical to his uncle's. His hands trembled as he handed it to the shop owner. This is for you, he said, his voice hollow. As he walked away, the clock began to chime, its hands spinning toward midnight. The shop owner didn't notice the faint scratches beginning to appear on its surface until it was too late. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Mara had always found peace in hiking, especially alone. The dense canopy of trees, the crunch of leaves underfoot. It was her escape from a busy, chaotic life. But today, the woods felt wrong. A rustling sound made her stop. It wasn't the gentle sway of branches or the scurry of a squirrel. It was deliberate, heavy. She turned, her heart hammering. That's when she saw it. The bear stood on its hind legs, towering over her, its dark eyes locked onto hers. She barely had time to scream before it lunged, claws tearing through her shoulder. Her world went dark. Mara woke in the hospital. The doctors told her she was lucky to be alive. A camper had found her bleeding out and called for help. The bear's claws had left deep, jagged scars across her shoulder and back. But there were no signs of infection. Still, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her body ached in ways that didn't feel normal. Her senses felt sharper. She could hear the hum of fluorescent lights and smell the antiseptic in the air so vividly it made her nauseous. It's just trauma, the doctor reassured her. Give it time. But time only made things worse. 2 weeks later, Mara woke in the middle of the night with a searing pain in her back. She stumbled to the bathroom, gripping the sink as her reflection stared back at her, pale and drenched in sweat. Then she noticed her nails. They were longer, sharper, almost claw-like. Panicking, she tried to cut them, but they grew back within minutes. Her teeth ached, her gums bleeding as her canines sharpened into points. "What's happening to me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. As she stared at her reflection, her eyes flickered, a flash of golden yellow, like the bear's. Mara avoided people, afraid they'd notice the changes. But the hunger was harder to hide. It wasn't food she craved. It was something deeper, primal. The scent of raw meat made her mouth water, and every time she saw someone walking their dog or jogging in the park, a part of her wanted to chase them. One night, she woke up in the woods, her clothes shredded and her body covered in dirt. Her hands were stained with blood. She stumbled home, shaking, and turned on the news. The headline made her stomach drop. "Wild animal attack leaves jogger dead." The reporter described claw marks on the victim's body, eerily similar to those left by the bear that had attacked Mara. But this time, there was no bear. Desperate for answers, Mara returned to the forest where she'd been attacked. The air was heavy, the trees looming like silent witnesses. She followed the trail she remembered, her heart pounding as she reached the clearing where it had happened. That's when she saw it. The bear was there, but its body was wrong. Its limbs were too long, its movements too human. It stared at her, its eyes gleaming with recognition. "You marked me," Mara whispered, the words spilling out before she could stop them. The creature tilted its head, a grotesque grin spreading across its face. "You carry the curse now," it rasped, its voice an unnatural blend of growls and whispers. "What do you mean? What's happening to me?" "You're becoming one of us." Mara tried to fight it, but the changes came faster. Her reflection became unrecognizable, her once soft features now sharp and feral. Her skin itched as patches of fur sprouted, and her senses became overwhelming. The hunger consumed her. One night, as the full moon rose, she felt her body break and reform. Her screams echoed through the house as bones snapped and shifted. When it was over, she stood on 4 legs, her claws digging into the wooden floor. She caught her reflection in the shattered remains of her bathroom mirror. The creature staring back wasn't human anymore. Mara vanished from her old life, leaving behind only blood-stained sheets and shredded clothes. Hikers began reporting strange sightings in the woods. Something that moved like a bear but wasn't quite right. And deep in the forest, the shapeshifter that had marked Mara watched her hunt. Its grin widened, knowing the curse had found a new host. The transformation was complete. Caitlin and her husband Mark had just moved into their new home, a modest house in a quiet cul-de-sac. It wasn't flashy, but it was theirs, and they were excited to start fresh. From the moment they arrived, Caitlin noticed something odd. Across the street stood a weathered old house with peeling paint and dark windows. The yard was overgrown, and a rusted mailbox leaned at an awkward angle. "What's the story with that place?" Caitlin asked their new neighbor, Mrs. Jennings, as they unpacked. Mrs. Jennings hesitated. "That's Mr. Alder's house. He's been there forever, but he's a bit of a recluse. Doesn't talk to anyone." Caitlin glanced at the house again. A shadow moved behind one of the upstairs curtains. She shivered. It wasn't long before Caitlin started noticing odd things about Mr. Alder. At night, she'd see him standing in the window, staring at their house. He never waved, never moved, just watched. "Mark, I swear he's always there," Caitlin said one evening, pulling the blinds closed. "Maybe he's just lonely," Mark replied. "If it bothers you so much, we can introduce ourselves." Caitlin wasn't convinced. There was something unsettling about the way Mr. Alder seemed to know exactly when she was looking. One night, while taking out the trash, she spotted him at the edge of his yard. His face was obscured by the shadows, but she could feel his eyes on her. "Good evening," she called nervously. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked back into his house without a sound. A week later, Caitlin's cat Milo went missing. "He never strays far," Caitlin said, pacing the living room. "Something's wrong." They searched the neighborhood, calling Milo's name, but he was nowhere to be found. That night, as Caitlin lay in bed, she heard a faint scratching sound. She followed it to the living room window and peeked through the blinds. Mr. Alder was standing on his porch, holding something in his hands. It was too dark to see clearly, but Caitlin's breath hitched when she thought she saw fur. She wanted to march over there, but fear rooted her in place. "Tomorrow," she whispered to herself. "I'll go tomorrow." The next morning, Caitlin convinced Mark to come with her to Mr. Alder's house. They knocked on the door, but there was no answer. "Maybe he's not home," Mark said, shrugging. But Caitlin felt something was off. The door wasn't fully closed, and a cold draft seeped through the gap. "Hello," Caitlin called, pushing the door open slightly. The interior of the house was dim and cluttered. Dust hung in the air, and a faint, unpleasant odor lingered. "Mr. Alder?" They stepped inside cautiously. The living room was filled with old furniture, stacks of newspapers, and jars. Dozens of glass jars lined the shelves, each one filled with something unrecognizable. Mark picked up one of the jars, his face twisting in disgust. "What the hell is this?" Before Caitlin could answer, a faint meowing echoed from upstairs. Caitlin raced up the creaking stairs, Mark close behind her. The meowing grew louder, more frantic, until she reached a closed door at the end of the hallway. She hesitated, her hand trembling as she turned the knob. Inside was a small windowless room. The walls were covered in strange symbols, drawn in what looked like ash. Candles burned on every surface, their flames flickering unnaturally. In the center of the room sat Milo, cowering inside a crudely drawn circle. His fur was matted, but he was alive. Caitlin rushed to grab him, but as soon as she stepped into the room, the candles extinguished, plunging them into darkness. The door slammed shut. A low voice filled the room, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You shouldn't have come." Caitlin clutched Milo, her heart racing. "Who are you? What do you want?" The voice chuckled. "I've watched you. I've watched everyone. None of you ever leave me alone." Suddenly, the symbols on the walls began to glow, illuminating the room in an eerie red light. In the center of the symbols stood Mr. Alder, or what was left of him. His skin was stretched taut over his bones, his eyes hollow and glowing faintly. "This house keeps me alive," he rasped, "but it needs more. It always needs more." Caitlin realized too late that the circle Milo had been sitting in wasn't for keeping him in. It was for keeping something out. The symbols began to shift, the glow intensifying. A shadowy figure emerged from the wall, its form shifting and writhing. Mark grabbed Caitlin's arm. "We have to go, now." They barely made it out of the house alive. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the front door slammed shut, and the house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Caitlin and Mark never spoke of what they saw, but they moved out of the neighborhood the following week. The house still stands, and Mr. Alder is still there watching from the window. But now there's something else with him, something darker, and every so often a new family moves into the neighborhood, drawn by the house's quiet charm. They never stay for long. Emma loved estate sales. There was something thrilling about uncovering forgotten treasures in dusty old homes. When she stumbled upon the antique mirror, she felt an immediate pull. It was tall, ornate, and framed with intricate carvings of vines and roses. The glass was slightly tarnished, giving it a hauntingly beautiful quality. "How much for the mirror?" she asked the seller. The old man hesitated. "That's not for sale," he said quickly. Emma frowned. "But it's just sitting here." The man sighed, his expression darkening. "It's cursed. People who take it never come back." Emma laughed nervously. "Well, I don't believe in curses." Reluctantly, the man agreed to sell it. As she loaded the mirror into her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that the old man's warning wasn't just a sales tactic. Emma hung the mirror in her bedroom, admiring how it caught the light during the day. But that night, she woke with a start, her heart racing. The mirror seemed different. The room reflected in the glass wasn't quite her bedroom. The furniture was the same, but the shadows were deeper and the angles felt wrong. She leaned closer, squinting at the reflection. That's when she saw it, a figure standing in the corner of the mirrored room. Emma spun around, but her bedroom was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. Over the next few days, the mirror's reflection became more unsettling. Sometimes, Emma noticed small differences. A book out of place, a door slightly ajar, and then the reflection started moving on its own. One morning, as Emma brushed her hair, she caught a glimpse of her reflection pausing mid-motion. It stared back at her, unmoving, even as she lowered the brush. Her heart pounded as she reached out to touch the glass. The reflection smiled, a slow, unnatural grin that didn't belong to her. Emma stumbled back, gasping. When she looked again, the reflection was normal. "Just my imagination," she whispered, trying to convince herself. But she knew better. That night, Emma woke to a faint whispering sound. It seemed to come from the mirror. She sat up, her breath fogging in the cold air. The whispering grew louder, forming words she couldn't quite make out. Gathering her courage, she approached the mirror. "Who's there?" The whispering stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, her reflection leaned forward, pressing its hands against the glass. "Let me out," it mouthed. Emma screamed, stumbling backward. The mirror rattled violently, as if something on the other side was trying to break through. She grabbed a blanket and threw it over the mirror, her hands shaking. The whispering stopped, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her from beneath the fabric. The next morning, Emma decided to get rid of the mirror. She called her best friend Lila for help. "It's just a mirror," Lila said skeptically, as Emma explained everything. "Then why don't you take it?" Emma snapped, her voice trembling. Lila rolled her eyes. "Fine, I'll take it. You're just scaring yourself." They loaded the mirror into Lila's car, but as they drove, Emma noticed her reflection in the rearview mirror. It wasn't copying her movements. "Lila, stop the car!" Emma shouted. "What? Why?" Emma pointed to the rearview mirror, but the strange reflection was gone. "Never mind," she muttered, her unease growing. That night, Emma felt relieved knowing the mirror was out of her house. But as she prepared for bed, she froze. The mirror was back. It stood in its usual spot, the blanket still draped over it. No, Emma cried, backing away. The blanket slid to the floor on its own, revealing her reflection, or what should have been her reflection. Instead, the figure in the glass was grinning. It reached out and tapped the other side of the glass, as if knocking. "You brought me here," it said, its voice echoing in Emma's head. "Now it's your turn to take my place." Emma felt an invisible force pulling her toward the mirror. She clawed at the floor, screaming, but it was no use. The surface of the glass rippled like water as she was dragged through. When Emma woke, she was standing in her bedroom, but something was wrong. The air felt thick and the colors were muted. She turned and saw herself in the mirror. Only it wasn't her. The reflection waved, a triumphant smile on its face. "Thank you," it said, its voice muffled. "Enjoy your new home." Emma pounded on the glass, screaming, but no one could hear her. She was trapped, her world reduced to a cold, silent reflection. And on the other side, the imposter lived her life free at last.